Hello. I'm so excited to be with the whole Lesbians Who Tech familia. I want to welcome you to the In Real Life Pride Summit second half of the last day. This is it. We're getting into that final stretch, and I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited to meet the cast of the L Word. But more than anything, I'm super excited for those of you that don't know Amy Errett to introduce you to her, to give you sort of an inside look into the magic that is Madison Reed, but also to be on topic. And I want to talk about that a little bit. We're going to be focusing in the next half hour on the future of venture capital and the future of startups, which I will be honest, when Leanne first reached out to me to talk specifically about this topic, anybody who can't see my t-shirt, it says venture capital with the word venture crossed off and the word builder on top of it. I'm a builder capitalist. I'm not a venture capitalist. And for anybody who's been watching me and certainly seeing some of my TV appearances, I regularly rail against the problems, racial, gender, inclusion, so many issues in the venture capital world, that when Leanne first reached out to talk about this subject, I actually thought it was a joke. And then when I realized it wasn't a joke, I thought it was meant to be adversarial or a debate or something along those lines, until she told me that the call was going to be with Amy Errett. And if anybody is going to help me not be sour about VC, and if anybody is going to convince me that VC does in fact have a positive future and a role in the world, and in fact not just a role in the world, but an amazing role that can truly make meaningful change in the world, then it's Amy, and it's the Madison Reed story. I've been following Amy for years. We met a number of years ago, and I was so impressed. Everything she said that she was envisioning and dreaming of doing, she's done, and we're going to talk about that. And so instead of me giving you a introduction about what Madison Reed is and specifically why it's so different and why this particular business model and this particular company is truly the embodiment of what this tiny little niche can do. And I do want to frame it that way, because I think one of my beefs with venture capital is not that it exists, it's just that it takes up so much of the oxygen. And what people don't realize is that it represents 0.05% of business financing. So despite the Shark Tanks of the world and the fact that it takes up every single cover of every single business magazine, it feels like, it is a niche. It's a tiny little niche. And when used, for the wrong purposes, it can be particularly damaging, especially to communities of color, especially to women. That is not the story of Madison Reed. And so what I wanted to start off with is just to kick things off by saying, Amy, I want to take some time to talk about why Madison Reed is kicking ass, why you are blowing up every metric, why you're growing as fast as you're growing. But before we do that, can we talk about how you were talking about prioritizing and centering women of color long before it was blowing up in the news? You built Madison Reed on some really amazing foundations. Can we talk about that first? Just so,
Sure.
how are you differentiated and why?
Sure. So number one, thank you for having me. Number two, awesome t-shirt. I share some of your sentiments, having been an ex-VC before I started Madison Reed, and still a VC with True Ventures that led our Series A. And I'll take you through why that is, because the comment that I want to make is, when done well, it is a very noble profession. And I think that it gets a bad rap because of behavior. It doesn't really deserve the bad rap if it's done in a noble way. So a little bit about why we started Madison Reed, which is, I think, going to hit right at what you're asking, is, I have a deep belief and found this by looking at this space. Number one, I think everybody would understand the total addressable market for hair color is massive. I would think in the current state, the most popular meme on social media was, now we're going to find what everybody's true hair color is. We had a meme back that said you don't have to, but that's besides the point. So I think, the total addressable market's huge. The ingredients in existing hair color were horrible and toxic. And so we took out the harsh chemicals. All those things are great. We put technology around it. Like, there's a whole thesis to a new way to think about hair color. But here's really the underlying thesis. The average colorist in the US graduates from cosmetology school $23,000 in debt. The
Oof.
average colorist in the US makes less than $15 an hour. A
That math
major
does not work.
math doesn't work. The major portion of those colorists are people of color, primarily women. So when I started the company, one of the missions that you can see from my, obnoxiously purple sales pitch behind me on the virtual screen was really about matching the possibilities that this group of primarily people of color women could have a better life. I'm really happy to talk about the fact that our folks make approximately 2.5x more than they've ever made. There's lots of things we've put around full-time person. We cover all their benefits. Like there's so many things that what I need to say is like the intention of the company was yes, better ingredients, yes, technology, yes, a huge size of the prize. But the intention of the company was to actually have a revolution in an industry to take people that deserve, because they are artists, to be paid attention to. I mean, if you talk to most people, like who's one of the closest people in your life that you trust? Your stylist, right? It's an emotional business. And yet many of these women have to rent a chair, buy their own tools, become marketers, business people. We got it. And so in the beginning, before we had stores, our entire call center were all certified licensed colorists.
In the call center answering the phones?
Yeah, and they still are. And the reason is that it's a very technical business, right? The friction point in our business model is, are you going to trust that you could apply this and it would look great and the color's right? So that was the thesis. But the underlying little piece was, geez, if we could create massive job opportunities in a venture-backed company and actually dispel this notion that gender-based businesses can never get that big. There aren't great women founder stories, certainly not gay women founder stories, lesbian founder stories. Wow, that's just really radical. And we could do really, like in our hearts and minds, we could do something that changed the trajectory of people's lives, then we had it all. And, we're 6 years into it. Once we also started opening stores, which was 2 years ago, we now will have 20 open in 2 weeks in regions throughout the country. Wow. Each one is employing 20 to 25 colorists. 60% of our team members in our color bars are people of color, primarily Black. And so we are at the epicenter of real change. And I have this theory in my life, having been involved in the gay movement for years, right? The theory is this: the change doesn't really come in big sweeping, on one day you just unveil and everything's changed, right? People's hearts and minds are all changed. No, actually change comes incrementally, and it comes by little tiny pebbles that you drop in, someone's life, and their life changes, and there's a ripple, and then they change their kid's life, and then they change. And I just think we have a movement, we have a revolution going on around this industry. And so, that was the thesis. That's proving to be a good thesis. Like anything else, running a company is like a, roller coaster ride. It's not for the faint of heart. But at the same time, what should be invested in my opinion, is great business ideas, but really about great people who want to build great culture. Great companies come from a core belief that the values are authentic and true.
Amy, first of all, I love that. And I think that is why the topic is perfect, right? It's about, what does the future of this look like, right? And I think that the past hasn't reflected that. And I love that, we're raising you up as the example of what needs to happen. And I agree, things happen little by little, but I often say they happen little by little and then all of a sudden. And I hope that the floodgates open for a bunch of other Madison Reeds, right? In terms of the culture. And what you're talking about, it's economic justice. Something as simple as benefits, which you just kind of listed in a long list of things that you do that it's different. it's life changing. The ability to know that you're not going to be bankrupt because your
Totally.
kid got sick, that's life changing. And that is economic justice. And today we were talking about, actually, before we got on, there was a Bloomberg article written by one of my favorite reporters, Emily Chasson, about the fact that the Trump administration has put in place language with teeth that essentially penalizes potentially ESG investments. And anybody who's not familiar with that term, right? Environmental, social, and governance. So basically,
Right.
if you're looking to put your 401k into something that is not toxic to the environment, like, the Madison Reed products, something that is good for society, like Madison Reed's programs and how you manage your employees, that you might actually be penalized because they're really focusing on the bottom line. And what is interesting about that whole statement, the whole framework, right, is this idea that you can't have both. And
Right.
so when you outline all of the things that you just outlined, I wonder if, like, a cutthroat capitalist who just thinks, how are we going to have that quick moment of liquidity or that great exit for Madison Reed or whatever the outcome is, right? Is she making sacrifices? Is she making something that is ultimately going to be a concessionary return in exchange for these social programs that she's putting in place? That your numbers don't say that, right?
Yeah, they don't say it. And they don't say it, but we're also 6 years into it, right?
Mm,
So we've had
yeah.
enough, runway. We've had enough muscle memory to understand the unit economics of our business. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I have investors who are completely bought into the culture. I have investors that understand that these things aren't delinked with each other. Like, how do you run a consumer facing business that's about making women feel confident,
Mhm.
but your team members are miserable? Like, those two things, I talk about it all the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
your team members' excitement and mental stability and health and safety and security have a direct correlation with what your customers experience. I mean, best example, let's call a credit card call center today. Do you
Mm.
think that I mean, is that a joyous experience? I think not. And it's
That's
because,
the entire reason I have an assistant.
okay, but it's because when,
Yeah.
when you don't invert the pyramid, as I call it, right? This is like a very critical piece. Silicon Valley always goes to, whether it's hourly employees or whether it's less essential senior management, they're always seen as the lowest part of the food chain.
Mm.
And so unless you invert the pyramid radically, and you basically say, no, no, actually in hair color, and I can't speak to other business models, I'm, pretty deep into hair color right now. But if you invert the pyramid, you say, Amy Errett knew nothing about hair color.
Mm.
The people that knew everything about hair color were the stylist and the colorist. So was I supposed to not put them in the forefront to make the business better? Absolutely. And once we got into that, to realize they're the heart and soul of the brand. I, I'm benefiting off of their being the heart and soul of the brand. So it is absolutely incumbent for this company and this senior team to embrace the concept that the justice belongs to the people that are doing as much of the lifting about the brand resonance, right?
Right.
So, at the end of the day, we've just inverted the pyramid. And we've
Yeah.
just said, like, we're going to pay you more than anybody would pay. We're going to give you benefits. We're going to give you one medical, in addition to benefits, we're going to give you free one medical, every single year, that that you and your family can go to one medical and basically get, terrific healthcare plus insurance. We're going to give you talk space so that if you have mental health issues or you need more safety and security, you can get to a therapist 100% paid. We're going to give you meditation apps. We're going to think through and start to have dialogues in the company around how your voice has never been heard. And so, things like, I hear all the time, because I talk to
Mm.
everybody. I've spent my lifetime, going along to get along. I don't even know how to answer your question, Amy, because no one in leadership has ever asked me my opinion.
Mm.
That is a startling thing for a founder or CEO to hear. It's like
Yeah.
piercing through my heart that we would have a society where people's voices can't be raised because they've never been welcomed. So
Right.
like we're radically going to shift all of this. You know, will 100% of it like work? Probably not, because that's the law of averages in, you know, anything that we do. But
Yeah.
I am so excited about the future of the company, not because I'm trying to build a company that becomes a unicorn, whatever the hell that means. But I'm trying to build a company that actually services our clients in the best way and has this experience for our team members that's life altering. Like if we can do that, the rest is going to take care of itself, right? It's a win-win-win.
Yeah. I mean, the cutthroat capitalist in me loves that you're not making the this is the right thing to do, even though it is argument. You're making an economic argument for
Totally.
being humane. And the economics make sense, the math makes sense. The company, I
Totally.
think I remember you saying that you earlier you were talking about that you're going to have 20 stores, 27 by the end of the year, but in 2021 you're looking at opening 25 more. Your growth is impressive, and by any measure, you're making that economic argument, and at a time when multi-generational wealth is such an important topic. I don't know if you read this, but about a year ago there was an article that the median net worth of a Black Bostonian is $8.
Yeah. I mean,
Boston.
yeah, the numbers are staggering. I just find it, you know, look, for 20 years I chaired the board of Glide. And so there's an interesting part where, you know, could the capitalist find a way to run a company that's venture backed in a way that the mission spoke to me and
Mhm,
purpose?
mhm.
And I think we're getting there, right? Like I feel proud of the fact, but it's hard work because if you're going to measure everything by short-term ROI, it's more expensive to do it this way,
Yeah.
right? And I don't care. So the point of the matter is I will stake my reputation, which is a long and vast reputation in Silicon Valley, on the following statement: this company is going to shock people about its outcome. And what does the outcome mean? To me, it means that we actually change lives and that we did everything we could at the end of the day to be great,
Yeah.
you know, change motivators, and at the same time our customers have great hair. Like, you know, you know, and we're going to shock people. I can tell you that because, you know, when I pitched this business initially, I mean, our investors are amazing. I had so many people say things, mostly guys, no offense. They were like, women color their hair that often? And I'd be like, dude, were you looking at
Girl.
your, yeah, it's like, really? And
Yeah.
you know, and it was just so like disparaging towards
Mm,
understanding, you know, confidence and understanding personal care on a level that even gave it any respect.
mm.
And so, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the people that have believed have had deep belief. You know, John Callahan at True, Jeff Crow at Norwest, you know, Sonia Brown at Norwest, Haley Barna was one of the co-founders at Birchbox, has been on our board. These people have had deep belief and they saw it early, and they realized that unless you change a business model systemically, you're always going to run into the wall.
Yeah. You're speaking my language. Earlier you said outcomes. My family office is called Outcomes Over Optics
Yeah,
because
well, yeah. I
that's
call
our
it all the time that most companies focus on actions, not outcomes. And at the end of the day,
mm,
outcomes are what drive big outcomes. Right?
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
you know,
You know, and you mentioned specifically this idea that you're neck deep in hair color, right? And you're not going to necessarily speak to other sectors, but when you said that, it reminded me of like the history of something like the Girl Scouts, right? Where
yeah,
what does selling cookies have to do with girls' leadership? It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle
everything,
for doing this bigger umbrella of work that's
confidence.
so important in the world, right? Cookies and entrepreneurship turned out to be the vehicle that worked for them.
Totally.
Hair color is the vehicle that you're using, but I actually think it's eminently applicable for other sectors. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
I want
think that
to add,
you go ahead. No, go for it.
well, my thought is that maybe that's a segue since we're really talking about the future of venture and startups. Um, what are the things that somebody watching this, right, who's thinking if I have to take venture, or if I'm going to launch a startup, do I have to conform to this sort of dominant narrative of how this works? You're absolutely proof that that's not the case. But how do they start thinking about building in this way? What are the things that they have to consider? Or if somebody's already neck deep in a startup and they're wanting to really stay true to their values, um, I would love to sort of get towards the end of giving some sort of a roadmap based on your real lived experience, I guess.
So for me, the first place it starts is that you said something early on, which is not every company should be venture backed. So the
Mm.
first place that I'll start here is there are gazillions of very successful companies that never raised a venture dollar, and they should never raise a venture dollar. And they can be incredibly successful, and people should feel proud and feel completely, satisfied that they built a company that they own more of and that they
Big
had more of an
ones.
imprint. Yeah, big ones, big, big, big.
Huge.
So that's the first
Yeah.
thing. Okay. So this first notion that, oh, if I'm not venture backed, that's terrible, is a misconception, number one. Because here's the thing, when you take venture money, there actually are some rules of engagement,
Mm.
right? Like that is the truth.
Yeah.
And one of the truths is that their venture is a noble profession that has a business model. And part of the business model is venture funds get money from other primarily endowments, family offices, pension funds to invest in a asset class that's called alternative investments, and they have to give a return, right? So the truth
Mhm.
that is startling, and this is the piece that people never focus on, many, many, many venture funds investors, their limited partners, are actually nonprofits looking to do good work, or actually universities endowments, or
Mm.
actually hospital endowments, right? Like it isn't the core of it isn't bad money, right? It is, there are some noble things that go into investing in a fund. But having said that, the fund needs to give a return. And so that is a important factor to understand. And then the last thing that I'll say about this is once you understand that sort of equation, it isn't about the money. It's about who's around the table.
Mm.
I had the good fortune of being able to handpick people that I knew in their heart and soul got it, got what we were about. Because if you take the money from people that don't, then you have misaligned goals. And when you have misaligned goals, not good things happen,
Mm.
bad things happen. And so at the end of the day, I was never going to take money where the goals were misaligned. And maybe because I had some insight, or I happened to be around the board table when I was a VC with other people that wanted to invest, I was like, nah, no, thank you. And it was more because it is really hard to be a founder. And you have to, in your bloodstream, believe in what you're doing.
Mhm.
And my belief in what we're doing has as much to do with justice as it does the perfect color for your hair. And so at the end of the day, I'm just not going to settle for something that I think ultimately will blow up the business model. And if that means it takes 10 years, 20 years, I don't give a hoot about that. I'm building a legacy. We are building a legacy brand that is going to be here for a long time, not because I want to be a unicorn, but because I want to do the right things in the world. So
Mm.
just a different motivation. And with that will come massive success. I know it.
It already has. It's so impressive. It's so impressive. And I often talk about these brands where, all things being equal, you're choosing between two, and one of them clearly speaks to you. I think about random jacket at the store versus the Patagonia jacket. All things being equal, Avant-Garde stands for something.
Yeah,
1%
exactly.
for the planet stands for something. It speaks to me. So I'm going to pick the thing that speaks to me. And I think that that's increasingly the case. And I don't know that if people are just passionate about, having great quality products on their body and even knew about Madison Reed would have necessarily known how much thought and how much love and care went into building every sort of block of what Madison Reed is. So I just want to thank you so much for giving
Thank
us
you.
that insight. And then because we just have a couple minutes more, I suspect we probably have like one or two. What do people need to know, both about Madison Reed, about you, about what your thoughts are, even on an entrepreneur that is going to do one thing, sort of walking out of here and say, this is the nugget I'm going to walk away with?
When we first started Madison Reed, in the first week, before we even had a product or a website, there were 4 of us that sat in a room, and we to this day, it's the same values that we wrote down on a piece of paper, and the same mission statement, and the same level of engagement about those values. That has never wavered. And the one thing that I want to share with you is culture doesn't come after. When people talk about, well, I'm building a product. Well, part of your product is your culture. It's the soul of the company. So if I'm going to leave you with one nugget, is you need to lock in, and no one can tell you your values are wrong. They're your values. And then that is the lens for which you serve your clients. That's the lens for picking team members. That's the lens for the actions you take. That's the lens that when you go to bed at night, you look in the mirror and you say, am I clean with what we're doing? Does it feel to me like I lived what I promised people? If you can do that and stay true to those values, you will have a successful company, because it's not even the financials. It's that every day you're living an authentic life. You're teaching other people how to have truth and authenticity. So start with the values of how you want to operate as much as the product.
I love it. I love it. And I think that given that it's hair color and it's economic justice and it's multi-generational wealth, it's also a little bit sneaky and subversive. So I love it for that reason too.
Well, I have one last thing to say. You know, my underlying goal is to change red states by employing enough people who are, essentially love this brand, and I'm out. And I have had team members who I go to stores and they're like, I never met a gay person before. And that is awesome, because when you create this kind of economic justice, people's hearts and minds understand it. They speak. So anyway.
Amazing. Amy, I cannot thank you enough. You definitely
Thank you,
shocked
Natalie.
me. I hope you shocked everybody else in all the best ways. Thank you for being here.
Sure. And Natalie, thanks for all your work. You're doing great stuff in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.